citizen.
Out of many
We are world citizens, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast, where each week we focus on solutionaries. As most of you know, the People Powered Planet podcast was inspired by Garry Davis, who I worked together with as he was evolving concepts of a people-powered planet, how we could make a better way of running our world. And we're so pleased we have David Gallup with us, who also worked closely with Garry on evolving his concepts of citizen-based governance. And so Martin Sheen has proposed that we make a series of that book. And as in preparation for that and working on that, we are now this month focusing on chapters of Garry's book, My Country is the World. And chapter 1 opened up, plunging us right in the middle of him being in a bomber plane with flak blowing up and blowing off pieces of his plane, and seeing death all around him as he's crash lands the plane, and he finally survives. And then he goes into New York, back to New York high society from where he came, and all his friends expect him to be funny, and they have light conversations. And instead, they say, "Come on, Garry, tell us a story about your war experience." And he tells this dreadfully painful experience, and everybody's like silent, and then they try to ignore what he said and go back to light patter. They can't face what he's dealt with, and he's torn up inside. And he said, I've got to take responsibility. We're heading toward World War III. What if I'm recalled and I have to go bomb Moscow in a war that'll end life on Earth? And people are, I've got to wake people up to this. And he ends up joining with the World Federalists, but saying, giving out pamphlets, organizing meetings, it's just not going anywhere. Something more is needed. And he realizes it's the very nation-state system itself that's causing the problem. And he, after much inner turmoil, he calls and finds out that in order to, he wants to give up his national citizenship and do something different as a world citizen. So he contacts the consul, and they tell him, you can only give up your U.S. citizenship if you're outside the country. And he picks France, Paris, as the place to do that. So he says, I chose Paris because the Attorney General informed him you had to be outside the country. So here he is sitting in the U.S. Embassy waiting to surrender his citizenship. And the woman who's always handling people trying to get back their lost passports and all is like aghast when he says he wants to give up his U.S. citizenship. Nobody does that. They're all trying to get U.S. citizenship. And so she says, wait, we'll have to see what to do. And so they call the top consul in. He comes in and he says, well, you're a veteran, aren't you? Yeah, I understand. Well, look, we'll have to get instructions from Washington. Come back in a week. Well, Garry knows they're stalling him, but he comes back in a week anyway. He said, what's the word from Washington? He says, they said, we didn't call Washington. We just wanted to give you time to cool off. That's what I thought. If I'm not given the oath of renunciation in the next 5 minutes, I will report you to Washington for neglect of duty. Furthermore, I'll give the story to the press about how you violated the chapter and verse of the U.S. Nationality Act. Well, okay, so they're kind of forced to, and they go ahead and give him the oath. And they get ready to give him the oath, and they say, raise your right hand, and then he said, well, isn't my other hand supposed to be in a Bible? So they run around searching for a Bible, and they can't find a Bible in the embassy. Finally, they have to run across the street and go to a hotel and borrow their Bible from the hotel and bring it back for Garry to go ahead and take the oath of renunciation. And so finally, they found a Bible at the Hotel Palais Royal, and 20 minutes past 2 on May 25th, 1948, I seceded from the exclusive nation state. Now, my first reaction to that event was, well, I felt thirsty. Uh, but he says, lightning didn't strike. Nothing really changed. I'm still wearing the same clothes. Uh, uh, you know, supposedly this was supposed to be something momentous, but didn't feel momentous. He said, took a look at the American flag flying over the heads of the soldiers there, and he said, "How many men have responded to that banner, sung its glory, marched beneath it, and died for it?" I asked myself. Flying there alone. It seemed to me it signified only division and aggression and fear and the terrible consequences. It no longer claimed my allegiance. He said the flag that did claim his allegiance had not yet been unfurled. So, he says, one of the chief objects of my gesture of renunciation was to demonstrate that the nation state system need not be overthrown because it doesn't exist. The nation state doesn't exist. Look at the planet from outer space. And that was before we could see the planet, but he knew that. He said, men's minds need only to be disabused. The nation state is a whole cloth myth perpetuated by the slavery of tradition and loyalty to pieces of paper which at best only pretend to recognize rather than to bestow existence upon an individual. If I could show that it was possible for me to survive in the world without papers, cross frontiers without a passport, conduct myself as a free human being without the benefit of any national credentials, I would be striking a blow at the very heart of nationalism itself. So he immediately takes off to AP to tell Bob Wilson, the night editor, what he did. And then he gets ready in the morning to go turn himself into the police. And he goes to this little hotel. And he said, it wasn't my intention to break French law, being without papers. So he's going to, go to the police. And he goes up to his room on the 5th floor. And then first, the clerk downstairs, signals him. United Press is on the phone. So he goes running down the five flights of stairs, takes the call from United Press, tries to go back up and go back to sleep. 5 minutes later, Reuters calls. Same thing, up and down, 5 flights of stairs. By this, and then this kept happening. He said, by this time, the little concierge looked at me as though I were a spy. International News finally calls him. And my story this time was a digest. Dissatisfied with what I told him, the INS reporter met me the next morning and followed me around in Paris all day. And the INS reporter actually drove him to some of the things he was going to do. First, he goes to the French. I can't pronounce French words, but anyway, it's the French sergeant, and they say he has to go to the Bureau of Americans, Strangers, anyway, they keep sending him around to different offices, and finally, he gets to the right office and he says, "My name is Garry Davis. I renounced my U.S. nationality at the embassy. Now I'm stateless. I don't want to break any French laws. What shall I do?" As I talked, her eyes grew wider and wider. There was a moment of silence, and suddenly she began to speak very rapidly. "Who are you really? Why did you give up those papers? How do I know you're Garry Davis? Anyone can walk in here and say that. Where's the paper that proves your identity?" I managed to say, "I don't have any papers. That's just the point. I renounced my papers back at the embassy." She says, "Then according to French law, you do not exist. You have no passport, no title of identity. You are nothing, nothing, nothing." So she seemed confused. Garry says, "Yes, ma'am." And there were these 10 or 12 rubber stamps sitting there on her table. And he says, like troops all signed up for action, but she couldn't command any of them. She said, "This was my introduction to a civilization in which a man does not exist unless he is supplied with numerous papers." He has to get them from the identity cards and traveling documents and army certificates and vehicle registrations and driver's licenses and all this. And he says nobody really is in this society unless, not just because they have life breath, unless they can present papers. Uh, so so he says, it was easy for me to see from the bewildered look on the lady's face that she was not prepared to deal with me directly. True, she could have stamped my forehead or the back of my hand or someplace where it wouldn't show, uh, but this was unsanitary as well as unofficial. And at the first great scrubbing, I would be I would be illegal again. So she says, please wait a moment. And she telephones and has a conversation in rapid French. And she says, Mr. Davis, you must go back to the embassy and get a receipt that they really have your passport. So he does that. And when he comes in, the lady says, did you change your mind? He says, no. The French say I've got to have a receipt. And so Miss Schneider sighed and obligingly gave me a letter stating that the embassy did, in fact, possess my passport. And back I went to the prefecture, handed back my paper letter to the rubber stamp general. She took it, gleefully glanced over the contents, turned it over, and with a flourish stamped it. Eh bien, eh bien. Now you exist, she said, smiling. So on the stamp portion, it had that tourist visa right there on the paper saying he gave up his United States citizenship. He says, but I have no tourist visa. She said, oh, a detail, putting the tax stamp below the seal. It's not worth troubling about. Uh, so when you return, maybe your 3-month visa can be extended. Now, don't lose that paper, 100 francs, please. So what did I have, in fact, but a receipt for my non-existence from one mythical state, which had been accepted for 3 months of existence by another mythical state. So both the American and French government have been so eager to issue me some sort of document, they had twisted and tortured their own laws to give me papers declaring that I was paperless, or symbols of existence to verify my non-existence. So I began to ask myself, who's the beneficiary of this transaction? Surely it was not I. I'm already self-aware. I'm already a human being. I don't need these papers to know who I am. So it was the nation state itself which was the beneficiary. My American passport had been such an austere and formidable looking document that at that point it had escaped me. Whereas now the perfect absurdity of papers was so clear to him. Here's this sham right in front of him. Here's a piece of paper, just a plain piece of paper, and that makes him exist. Papers give status, dignity, and privilege to the issuing authority rather than the bearer. He says, so all these things, all these papers, in all such cases, the individual unwittingly surrenders his right to assume command, status, or direction for himself in human terms by acknowledging and then accepting an outside authority's right to grant these things to him. And he goes through a lot of more philosophy about that and what that means, and he says, this is the kind of reasoning which prompted me to drop his receipt for the U.S. passport in the nearest trash bin. So he said, I was no longer concerned about breaking the law, for he thought I may well be breaking the laws of France by existing without papers. But what's more to the point, France breaks the laws of existence by illegalizing me in the absence of papers. I mean, who are they to illegalize me in the absence of paper? So then he began to realize he's got to divest himself of other worldly possessions. What influenced my next decision, he says, was that he talks about having one Jewish and one Christian parent, and that he'd always revered the Bible and remembered Jesus' instructions in Matthew. It said, neither provide gold nor silver nor brass in your purse, nor scrip for your journey. And it goes on, for the workman is worthy of his meat. And he said, I'm impressed by this passage and how it's kinship with the sages of India who gave up worldly possessions and to be in that kind of spiritual realm. So I bundled up my entire earthly possessions except for the shirts he was wearing, one extra shirt, his underwear, his typewriter. The reason he has such a great book here, because he carried this little portable Hermes typewriter with him everywhere he went in all these incredible adventures, which is really an unbelievable thing. But anyway, here he carries them, thank goodness. This was before the age of computers and cell phones. And so he gives all that away, and he says, I was truly amazed by the inner freedom. People on the street ogled me because I smiled broadly at the world. I couldn't help but sing and dance, he said, practically dancing down the street. He begins to live among the stateless people, and a Polish refugee who ran a restaurant becomes his friend and begins to give him food, and people cared about what he was doing. On August 15th, the day of expiration of my French visa, I returned to the prefecture, and so he found his friend and smiled and waited as people went. And she said, "Let me have the papers I gave you 3 months ago, and we'll see what we can do." Well, I'll tell you, I began, not knowing exactly how to break the news to her. Um, Give it to me quickly, she said, holding out. I don't have it anymore. I got rid of it because it represented something which I don't need to recognize. This didn't reach her at all. She just looked at him wide-eyed. You don't recognize France? France does not recognize me. Not recognize you? She echoed with resignation. Then I noticed something odd about her expression. There was the beginning of amusement, fighting to break through. I think it was possible she was getting a glimmer of the absurdity, but she killed that slight smile and said, "How could you do such a thing? After all we did for you, do you think we work here all day just to have our papers torn up? I must turn you over to another office, and I don't know what'll happen to you there." So she picks up another uh, phone to send him somewhere else. And then, as he's getting ready to leave, she opens her desk drawer and carefully unloads a cachet of newspaper clippings. The articles were all about Garrett and his escapades, and she actually asks him for his autograph. So anyway, suddenly I was no longer a pitiful stateless refugee to be kicked out of the country. I was a celebrity made legal by the press, legalized by the press. He gets a paper that classifies him as as a stateless person of American origin. And he says this was the first of this status. No one else had been classified as a stateless person of American origin. So he dashes out and he decides he wants to go to this conference in Luxembourg of the World Federalists and all the other groups that are working for a world federation. There were a lot of people after World War II, after seeing the devastation of that war, all working to try to get the nations to federalize, just as the United States, just as the individual colonies had decided to create first an Articles of Confederation, joining in some kind of a federation, which didn't really work until they finally actually decided they had to constitute themselves as a committee of the whole and actually declare a whole new government. He was trapped kind of paperless, and so he's scurrying back and forth to all these offices. Now that he made his own homemade ID card, which interested everybody intensely there. And now that he had his own ID card, he went through all those processes of getting papers and everything stamped in it because it was on his own card. But they ended up not being able to do it in time for him to go to this conference. And so it was still impossible to go. And so it was impossible to meet the deadline of where he was supposed to. At the stroke of midnight, I was to become illegal. A haunted man with literally no place to live. Sensing for the first time my real problem, his friend Don offered him asylum in his own flat. "You might be stuck with me the rest of your life," I told him jokingly. So we were standing by the window just then, sipping after dinner coffee, when I happened to glance down at a copy of the Morning Herald Tribune, the Paris edition. On the front page was a photo of Robert Schuman, the French delegate to the United Nations, handing a key to the Palais de Chaillot to Thierry Lee, the Secretary General. We have that picture in our movie, The World is My Country. It's a golden key symbolizing ceding the territory of the Palais de Chaillot. Basically, France ceded that territory to the United Nations for the duration of the session. So I grabbed the paper and Don began reading over my shoulders. Wow, in France, here's going to be a territory, international territory, but in France, but not of France. It seemed to me heaven sent. What better home could there be for a homeless citizen of the world? The more we talked about the idea, the more fascinating it became. Not only did international territory provide the perfect asylum for me, but my camping out at the UN would dramatize the need for world law. Naturally, I would ask for international law to govern me on international territory, but there wouldn't be any. Perhaps in this way, I could focus the attention on the inadequacy of the UN and suggest that if we could not provide for one lone human being, it would not be able to provide for the whole of mankind. It was a desperate plan, to be sure, but a beautiful argument for world governance. So he said, we drafted a statement, made copies, and I delivered them by hand to all the major wire services that night. And then I went home, set my alarm for 6, and went to sleep. That is now the end of chapter 2. Now, I hope each of you will read the whole book yourselves, because it's an incredible book. So let me throw it open, and maybe starting with David, if he's willing.
I mean, I can just start by, and I'm putting the link to the book from WSA's website in the chat.
Good.
And
There we are. You can order it right from WSA right in there. So
I have a question. David, can we order a nice t-shirt like the one you're wearing right now?
Yes, you can. And we have an online store where we also get a small percentage. We also have, as you probably can see behind me, hats that say, well, sort of like Arthur's that say I'm a world citizen. We have mugs and buttons and stickers and other things that you can celebrate world citizenship. And I know Arthur, Melanie, and I were talking just last week about, yeah, that's right, defend the planet. Arthur, Melanie, and I were talking last week about how what a great gift to young people for the holidays is giving them the gift of world citizenship, the gift of a future of peace and justice and sustainability for the world. So every time you make a donation or get a document from World Service Authority or purchase, for example, a shirt or a book, then that helps us to help the many people who are in vulnerable situations, refugees, stateless persons around the world like Garry was, but who didn't put, those people didn't, or now have not put themselves into the situation. Those stateless people and refugees have been put into that situation either by governments that are not respecting their rights, that are putting them into conflict and violent situations, or even just what's happening in nature, climate destruction that's causing people to have to flee just to save their lives or to find food. So, of course, every donation that comes into us helps us to provide free legal advocacy to refugees, free education to the people of the world about world citizenship, as well as documents to refugees and stateless persons who we do provide as many as we can for free.
Yeah, I think David's particularly right that a wonderful gift for kids and grandkids is a world passport, something they can hold, feel, tangible, and feel that identity with humanity as a whole. And it's not something they really need for like travel or anything like that. They just need it for that sense of identity, that they're taking back their identity, as Garry was talking about. Who are they? This invisible lines drawn on the planet to say who's real. And he realized that all that sovereignty comes from us, the people. And let's get young people realizing that and going back to the origin with their own world passport and world ID documents.
This is a great point for me to always state, because people are concerned about it. They might say, do I have to give up my nationality or citizenship like Garry did to get a world passport or to register as a world citizen? By all means, no. Garry would always say that when you affirm your world citizenship status, when you register and you get a new world citizen card and certificate or get the world passport, you're just adding that additional awareness of your link to humanity and to the earth, to protecting each other and to protecting our only home. So you don't give anything up. You're actually getting something out of it when you do that. Right when the war, for example, that started between Russia and Ukraine, we were getting many emails and pleas and letters from people saying, look, I'm Ukrainian or I'm Russian. I see these other people as brothers or sisters, as siblings. They're part of my family. I don't want to harm them. I don't want to kill them. I want to love them and live with them peacefully. So it's really sad that people have to sort of come to us to identify themselves or to remove themselves from the system like Garry did, that forces us to see others as an enemy rather than as a family. Garry, in many respects, was flying by the seat of his pants. And the fact that he was an actor and a comedic actor, I think really helped him go through this difficult situation where other people might have just withered away and said, okay, I'll just take my my national citizenship back. He was able to stand up using humor and his very clever ideas to be able to deal with this behemoth of the nation state system. And even his wife Esther mentions that at the beginning of the film about, I don't know how Garry could have survived if he didn't have a bit of humor.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's kind of hilarious when you just picture him at all these different offices, like just driving these bureaucrats crazy because doesn't fit into any of their preconceived notions. And it's certainly, if we can get the series going on, it will certainly be an eye opener for a lot of people. Great story for today's world. That's why I'm so excited that we're moving this forward, and hopefully that some doors will open for it. Stephen, were you about to say something? I saw you unmuted for a moment.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, and I think David has addressed that, kind of the struggles that Garry was going through, but he's entitled, and he has so many skills, and there are so many people going through this right now that are undocumented, and they don't have those skills of, how many of us do? So I think it really opens our eyes to what so many people are going through right now as refugees. We have more refugees than ever. All of what's happening in the States, with undocumented people there, who, it's just it. So I guess like with a series, I think that could be a really important part of what is brought out there. Although it's kind of the reverse, that it's in a way, because these people need some sort of documentation. But really, what we should be doing is taking a look at the world as the world and not as a bunch of countries. So, yeah. That's what it was really striking me, because so many people are suffering so much, and good on Garry for struggling through that and bringing that to the world's attention. Could we bring this to the world's attention again, not just because of what he went through, but with all the people that are going through, and maybe develop a little bit of understanding and compassion rather than what's going on presently.
What you said is so perfect, and is exactly why I think this series could be so important now. Any other thoughts or comments? We have 15 more minutes.
I can tell you really quick. I did put in the chat also, I have a new op-ed piece called Displacement and an Inherent Problem of a Divided World. And that's been going around, syndicated around the country, at least. And I just put the link on the Citizens for Global Solutions website where you can read that article. It's hopefully going to appear later this week in really respected foreign policy website called Foreign Policy in Focus. So I'm hoping that the article gets in there too later this week. But it gives this idea of the problem, the very vast, unprecedented problem of statelessness, of refugees, and this is just going to get worse with whether it's by humans fighting each other or whether it's by climate fighting back at what we've done to the earth, right? People becoming climate refugees. Like if you've seen the whole hour version of Arthur's film, you hear me say, where will people go if their country is underwater? Who will take them in? If like the whole of Italy, you could see the whole of Italy, for example, getting underwater. Will those people be able to go to France or Germany and then be considered French or German? Well, I mean, that's part of the European Union, right? So they would probably be accepted and as Europeans, and it wouldn't be a problem. But there's other places like small island countries where if it goes underwater, they can't live on the ocean, right? So where do they go?
That's the kind of problem we're facing. Anybody else want to jump in? I see Michael waving his finger. Were you wanting to say something or just?
Sure. Yeah. I wanted to take it to, and it's a question for David and everybody else, is what are the efforts currently underway as far as reforming the United Nations? And so I would think, the idea of a world parliament right there, so to democratize the whole system, where we get rid of this system where, the Security Council, they all have veto votes. And so obviously if Russia, wants to defend their position in their war, they're going to veto anything that's against their current trajectory. So, and also part two of my thing would be in the Sustainable Development Goals under Section 16 out of 16.9 of the United Nations calls for the creation of a identity system, because apparently 1 in 8 people on the planet do not have identity documents. So, David, you have 1 billion customers that are eager to get documents. So what, perhaps if the United Nations were to adopt this alternative identity system in the form of the World Citizen Passport for these people who, with a total civil war, they've basically lost their country or they've lost their documents, to have an alternative document that is respected and can prove who they are. I'll stop there.
So what I'm about to show you here, hopefully you can see that, is Pathways to a Peaceful, Just, and Sustainable World. This was actually not made by World Service Authority. It was made by Citizens for Global Solutions, and it does need to be updated, but it gives you some ideas of how people, campaigns, and coalitions around the world are actually trying to either reform the United Nations, sort of more from the inside, or to move beyond it. So how do we do that? So there's been multiple suggestions, such as it says integrating the regions of the world, so that, for example, there's been a talk in Africa to have one African passport. So everyone in Africa, no matter where they're born, whether it's, Kenya or Zimbabwe or Morocco or wherever, could have one passport and could go anywhere, sort of like the European Union. And then once that region is integrated, then you can integrate that with Asia and Europe and the Americas, etc. So that's one discussion. People have talked about uniting just the democracies, although democracy is under threat now, so it wouldn't be as many as it was maybe just a few years ago, perhaps. But to unite countries that already have the people voting and have most of the, many of their rights respected. So that would be one way to start. And once you unite those governments, then you could bring more people in. There is an Earth Constitution. It's called the Constitution for the Federation of the Earth, and that's if you go to earthconstitution.world, you can find their constitution. In fact, this coming December in Pondicherry, India, there's going to be a provisional World Parliament event with hundreds of people. World Service Authority is involved in that. I'm on their legislative review commission to help revise that constitution and actually get it out to the people of the world to understand it. So it's to really put the power into a world parliament of the people of the world, and not in some president or presidium, but in us, the people. So that's another way to talk about how we can get, sort of shows you here, the mountaintop of World Federation, a democratic, federal, participatory government of, by, and for the people of the world, as Garry would call it. And of course, there's these other ways of dealing with bringing us together through world citizenship education and raising awareness, so that, these are ways we could do it in a positive way. But of course, over here on the right side, it shows wars and disasters like climate destruction that may force us into creating a world governmental system. Let me just stop the share and give one more thought on that. There is Article 109 of the UN Charter, which talks about having every 10 years, a review conference of the UN Charter. And it was supposed to happen in 1955, 1965, 75, etc. There has never been a UN Charter Review Conference since the UN was created in 1945, but there should be. So there's a big group of people, and we're also part of that coalition, among all the coalitions that we are involved in, like the Coalition for the World Court of Human Rights that does not yet exist but should. But this Article 109 coalition, and you can search that online, and start participating in that, is looking forward to trying to advance this idea of reviewing the UN Charter. And they've already gotten several small, maybe developing countries, I guess you might call them, interested in this review conference. Because why are we at such a standstill with the United Nations? Really, it's because of the Security Council, the 5 permanent members, US, France, China, Russia, and Great Britain or UK, that really have their power of the veto, prevents us from moving humanity forward in any kind of quick and important fashion, which we really need to do now if we're going to save our the home, our only home, planet Earth. So that idea of a UN review conference is important. Of course, the Garry Davis view is that we can come together as people outside of that UN system, that sort of club of the nation states, and we as world citizens can populate, you might say, this world citizen government by and for the people of the world. And we don't have to do it within that system. We can do it outside that system, and of course, bring all the benefits of that system. I mean, if you ask Garry about the UN, he would say, well, there's wonderful agencies of the UN, whether it's the World Food Program or the different UN agencies that help people like UNRWA or whatever. They're helping, that we're helping Palestinians or whatever, that, lately, maybe because of national funding, have been gutted. But all these agencies are really doing important, World Health Organization, really doing important work and should be dramatically funded and would be in the end part of a world governmental system. But I don't know if any of you have ever been to the UN headquarters in New York or maybe the UN in Geneva, but they have a brochure. And if you open the brochure, it talks about the history and a little bit about what the UN is. And within the first paragraph, it says, the United Nations is not a world government. And that's because it doesn't give, or we don't have as people within that system, a vote, a say. We are not empowered to govern, and there is no legislative body. So it is not. It's really, as Garry would say, it's a club of the nations. It's not a governing body. And what we need is government for one humanity and for one world.
Very good. And I'm glad. Tell me again about. So you're part of an upcoming meeting to revise the Glenn Martin's Earth Constitution, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah, I could show you the picture of the front of the book, the Constitution for the Federation of the Earth, and that's coming up. It's in India. I won't be going to India, but I will be there over Zoom. For me, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. But I'm going to have a meeting where we're actually going to be talking about a world voter ID, where people can actually have a say in global issues and global matters, and really get their voices heard. And it's just, we have a 15-minute section during one of I think the second day of the Provisional World Parliament meetings in India to talk about that.
Great. I'm hoping, and I wish there was a way to inject into that. One of the things I think that Earth Constitution needs, it was created in a very structured, rigid way back before we had all these kind of more flexible internet tools and so on. And they have a thing about dividing the world into these separate regions.
1,000 districts.
But it really, that makes no sense at all. That part of it. That part ought to be. It ought to be a much more integrative, fluid system where people are integratively involved in governance. And the fact that if I'm in this latitude and longitude, that I should have more say with the other people right here, it doesn't really make any sense. We're all world citizens. We're on Zoom. We're all over the world here. We don't need to be put in new boxes. So I think that came out of a little bit of old thing, and hopefully as a part of it, you can help move them into new thing.
Well, certainly you can attend if you want or are able to. It'll be a little bit earlier for you since you're out on the Pacific coast. And I would encourage people to attend, because one of the purposes of this Provisional World Parliament is it's really, I guess, the 4th constituent or maybe 5th constituent assembly. They are actually getting people together to talk about revising and updating this Constitution for the 21st century, because the last time it was really revised was in 1991. So it's really, whatever, 30 years or so later, it's really important that we get the chance as the voice of the people to say what this Earth Constitution could look like to deal with the issues we're dealing with today.
Well, send me the info. It might be too late for me to get on their agenda. I don't know, but if I can get on their agenda in a substantial way, I'd like to contribute some more creative thinking to that. Go ahead, Stephen. I see you have a comment. Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, so just speaking about the UN, I mean, one of the paradoxes is that the UN can't do anything because they can't enforce their decisions. But it's a paradox, because if they had that kind of military might, it sort of defeats the purpose of the UN. And from its inception, because it does have these, 5 countries that can just scuttle anything. And I feel compelled to mention that the U.S. with Israel, there is a genocide going on right now. And the world cannot move forward with that. So whatever kinds of changes are made to the Constitution doesn't really matter unless these countries decide that they will live by the UN decisions. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what the Constitution says. That's the unfortunate thing. So it's I mean, I'd like to see the UN work, but until that happens, the United States has not signed on to the World Court.
Right.
You
Well,
know,
that's
I
a
mean,
very important point, and we definitely need it to be enforceable. But people make the mistake of thinking that enforcement is military power, and that's not true. I mean, if the reason you stop at a red light is not only, I mean, it's not because of military might. It's because these are the customs that everybody trusts, that it helps the society move together. And it used to be in Britain, for example, the cops didn't even carry guns or anything because,
right.
guns really are a very weak tool. So many policemen say, "Oh my God, this guy was doing something, and the only tool I had was to be able to shoot him or not." And it's a ridiculous tool. It's not a good form of enforcement. We see with all the nonviolent revolutions how much more powerful forces there are, and we really need a more integrative way of enforcement that has really nothing to do with military power, and we see it. That was why we talked last week about how, not last week, but the week before, about how the avocado farmers actually there were fields and fields of avocado trees that couldn't get picked and couldn't get shipped because there was no market because the Earth Guardians had identified them as lawbreakers, and so until they began to comply with the law, they couldn't market their avocados. There are ways that we the people can have people-powered enforcement, and that's a crucial part of evolving an Earth Constitution. And I hope, David, we can maybe talk about that in the group you're talking about too.
Arthur, if I could just
It's a
jump
real
in.
mistake to equate enforcement with military
Yeah.
power, because in a way,
Arthur,
military power is the opposite. It makes people resist. It makes them fight harder. It makes them go against whatever is happening instead of go with it.
that's why, Arthur, if I can jump in, that's why I said it's the paradox.
A paradox, right?
Okay, that's why it's the paradox because they can't enforce it because right now we look at, in a sense, military might or that sort of a power as being what enforces things. Until we get past that, that's the paradox. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Yeah,
basically,
absolutely. I
yeah,
agree with you. If you take troops, invading cities, if those people fight back, wow, that's exactly what authoritarianism wants, people to fight back so they can crush them and have military power. It's when you use like the singing revolution kind of thing, then they don't know what to do with it. They can't handle it. Or like with Garry, he never used violence with all these people. If he had, he would have been easy to quash and get rid of. That would have been a cinch. But he had a greater power, and that power came from within, and that's what we all need to seek.
Going back to what David was saying about this every 10-year United Nations Charter review, that sounds very interesting. But, we have this Earth Constitution as well, kind of a separate thing. And then there's also the Earth Charter, which I think is powerful and has a strong environmental component to it. So my idea would be, get an independent group of organizations and people, maybe professors and universities, to all help and kind of look at all three of these documents and see if they can be combine the best elements of each one and just go ahead and recreate a new UN charter, which is, democratic, and then every country would have almost, a voting system that's democratic between nations and maybe based on population. I don't know. But then, go ahead and draft the proposed, what would an ideal UN charter look like, and go ahead and write it, and draft it and incorporate the other parts of the World Constitution and the Earth Charter into it. So they all kind of come together as one. That would make the UN Charter even more valuable and powerful if it had the aspects of the Earth Constitution and the Earth Charter built into it.
Right. Yeah, well, that's actually a good point. And and one of the previous Secretary Generals of the UN did hold a worldwide conversation on the kind of world and institutions we need for the future. And a lot of CGS and a lot of groups were involved, and there was a lot of creative thinking on that. And so, yes, that's the kind of worldwide global conversation we need. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. I come each and every week to the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.